Yo, what up, YouTube? I'm Shotgun Shogun. Welcome to the channel. Now, this is going to be a serious video. It got brought up because somebody mentioned when I was talking about Sage Vivian, how the extra damage from Tooth and things like that. Hold on. My bad. I got ahead of myself. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not new to the channel, welcome back. I'm a little bit heated. I'm a little bit crazy. I've been in mocked rooms for like 3 hours today, testing pretty much everything that I could. Now, you'll see on my screen right now, Crimson Armin. One of the things that was brought up was how Sage Vivian's S2 works with damage reduction. Now, I am under the assumption, just like a lot of people are, when I ask them, hey, Tooth damage, if it goes over 25%, should be hit with the 70% damage reduction, right? What about Rimuru's S3? Yeah, it's true damage, but why wouldn't it be affected by damage mitigation, damage reduction? These are a lot of questions. A lot of the people that I asked were split on the thing. A lot of them said, yeah, Tooth is mitigated, but Rimuru's is not, because it's fixed damage. And then I got to thinking, well, what about splash damage? What about LQC's damage? What about other types of damage that happen outside of the general flow of the battle? Now, if you read Crimson Armin's S2, decreases damage received by allies by 10 to 15%. Doesn't get much more simple than that. Very straightforward. Decreases damage received by allies by 10 or 15% if you have it maxed out. Now, one would read this and assume that that is all damage. Every bit of damage. Whether it be an S1, an S2, an S3, Uberius Tooth, LQC's splash damage, Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, F10's artifact, Rimuru's S3, burn damage, bleed damage, you name it. However, that's not the case. I ran a lot of tests tonight. Big shout out to my guildie War of Lion for helping me out with all of these. We sat around and did math for hours while testing this, and we have a lot of test situations, and it is very concerning. Not only that, but Aras currently is giga bugged. Aras takes mitigation to a whole new level. Stick around till the end of the video when we talk about that, or just skip to the end of the video if you want to see that and then come back to the beginning of the video. Also, like, fave, subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. But let's get into some of the videos. I want to explain some of the tests that we did and why it is so concerning and why Smilegate really needs to address this. So, pulling this up, here are the test videos, the tests that we did. So, first up, I wanted to test LQC's splash damage. Now, throughout all of these, you are going to see us run multiple tests. We run it with a baseline. In this one, we are going to be using Lucy in the back line for the baseline damage when it comes to the splash damage. You'll see it baseline with C. Armin and then with an Aras on the field, just to show how much mitigation there is going to be. So as you can see, we push this up. We want to make sure that the LQC has 2 stacks of Hellcutter every single time. Every one of these matches has the same lineup from the War of Lion side and the same overall setup here. Now you'll see that is 8154 damage on that Lucy in the back line, and so we want to just make sure that we were setting the standard right there. Now you'll see in this run we have C. Armin on the field. Now if we go back to that C. Armin passive, it reduces all damage by 10 to 15%. My C Armin is maxed out, so that is 15% mitigation. No artifact. I didn't want to have an Arias on her, just so that I wasn't skewing any of the results here. This is just damage mitigation right here, damage reduction. So as you can see, we push her forward so that she just gets the 2 stacks of Hellcutter here. So she is going to jump. And remember, we were 8154. So as you can see, 8154 to the Lucy in the back line. So this means right here that that 15% damage reduction does not take into account splash damage. This right here is very, very concerning, because as it is written, that is 15% damage for everything. All damage incoming to allies is reduced by 15%. Now, this is my Crow. He's got an Arias. We are going to push up here. Thankfully, I got a crit, so we didn't have to do this all over again. Now, here is one of the big things. Remember, when you're looking at the numbers too in the future for Adamant or for Arias, you have to take into account that Arias has increased defense as well. So some of the numbers are going to be a little bit skewed off, but it's just little bits of differentiation because of the extra defense. So as you can see, here's the splash damage. Now, Arias does in fact soak up splash damage. As you can see here, Lucy is only taking 6483. Obviously, she still dies because she's level 1, but Crow is going to be taking 9059. Now, I want you to remember this, because we're going to come back to this at the end of the video when we're talking about the current Aras bugs. So as you can see, the Arias does work where the C Armin passive does not. Okay, so in this test, we wanted to test out Solitaria because she has an S1 into an extra attack that is going to proc the F10 artifact. Now, it is an 11 plus 15 artifact, so it's going to only add 1125 true damage to the end of this. So as you can see, first attack here, 837 into a dual attack, so 1026. Now we do proc the second attack, which is the one that we're actually concerned about here, because this is going to proc the F10 artifact, so that's 833 into the extra damage, which brings it up to 1958, which is what we would expect from the F10 artifact proccing on that S2. So here we go. We do see the C Armin brought in this time. Now we will S1 into the Charlotte again. And of course, it's going to dual attack. So we do see 1594 here. Now, one thing that I do want to point out, here's the S2. Now this is an extra attack. This does 709, so the C Armin passive is active here on the extra attack. However, not on the artifact proc. So the 709 gets bumped up to 1834, which is what we would expect, 1125. So the C Armin passive does mitigate the damage on the S2 proc. However, does not mitigate Fairy Tale for a Nightmare. Okay, we're going to go into our third test here, which is the Arias. So we're going to do what we did previously, which is S1 into the Charlotte and dual attack. And I would like to say that we just cherry picked all of the dual attacks, but we didn't. This was actually 3 dual attacks in a row. Esports ready. Yeah, three test runs, and we got dual attacks every time. Now, I wanted to show also when I paused there, the Arias was soaking up extra damage from that S1. Now, the S2 Crow is going to be taking a lot of extra damage here. It does take some of the damage away from the S2 proc here on the Charlotte. And we do see 1896 here. It's not going to be mitigated. The S2 was not mitigated. However, Crow is going to be taking extra damage. So the Arias is going to be taking that extra damage away from the Charlotte. Now here, I wanted to test the situation where you had an Uberius Tooth. Hua Young, her S1, if she is buffed, acts as an Uberius Tooth. So we took the artifact off of her. At the moment, she actually has gaiters on because of the next test where we wanted to test burn. So right now, S1, she's just going to S1, and we're going to look at the extra pop damage, because the way that this ability works is as if she has an Uberius Tooth, which is why it's so strong, because if you have an Uberius Tooth, it's going to double up on this extra damage. So as you can see here, 40-36 on the extra damage, and that is something that we wanted to look at right here. Now we bring in C. Armin to see if this is going to mitigate what would be an Uberius Tooth situation. So we come through. Now it does mitigate damage in the first hit here. So as you can see, it is working on that first hit. However, the extra damage that comes through, even though it's a little bit smaller now, it's only smaller because the first hit was mitigated. And if you do the math, it is exactly the same because, well, we did the math. Now here is with the Arias. Now, as you can see, we're going to get the S1 damage right here. It doesn't mitigate much. We do have defense buff, but we also have the extra little bit of defense here. As you can see, Crow is taking damage at the same time. And when the proc hits, Crow also takes extra damage, and we are getting an overall way less amount of damage off of that proc. So now we're going to be testing burn damage. This was something that was brought up in Discord when we were testing. They're like, hey, does burn damage get mitigated? Burn and bleed? Well, let's test it. Easy. So we come through, we bring in the Angelic of Light because I forgot that I had immunity set and I wanted to get immunity set off. Now, you will see a little bit of extra damage here just because we don't get the defense buff from hitting Charlotte, right? That is a little bit of a deviation there. So we do see the damage here. Now we are going to get a dual attack, but it doesn't really matter because all we care about is the burn damage, right? So that doesn't matter. And here's our burn damage. It's the 3649. Now this is something that you want to take and pay attention to, right? Because that is what we are going to be testing. Also, this dude got so many dual attacks when we were doing this. It was actually kind of nutty. So strip buffs. Now we have the C. Armin. We're going to come through. Here is the damage. Here is the burn, and 4555. And to the 3649, which was the burn damage without the C. Armin on the field. So it is exactly the same. Obviously, C. Armin's passive does not mitigate burn, which would lead us to believe that it does not mitigate bleed either. So here is with the Arias. So we're going to come through, strip buffs, come through, hit Charlotte, land the burn. There is the burn. Crow's going to go because, well, he sped up. I forgot that he was a little bit faster. So we're just going to slap this Angelic of Light here. And then Charlotte's going to go. Now I want you to pay attention to the Crow here because he is going to share that burn damage. 2758 on the Charlotte, 68.9 on the Crow. So Arias does share dot damage as well. All right, now moving on, I wanted to show you something a little bit weird with Rimuru. Now, if you take and pay attention here, Rimuru is going to S3 into the A Ravi. Now, I ran this test probably 10 to 15 times, and every single time it was the exact same. And this is really, really weird. Now, she has proof of valor. I didn't want to use her in the rest of these just simply because I didn't want proof of valor being in the mix. Now, I want you to notice initial was a crit. The 10696 gray text. Now pay attention to this, because this is where Rimuru's interactions with true damage get really, really weird for me. So 10696. Okay, so we had to bring Angelica of Light because I wanted to bring Trozette in, right? We were using Crow at first, and I realized that that wasn't a true test because Crow has elemental disadvantage. Rimuru has elemental advantage against Crow. I wanted a baseline because Rimuru's S3 basically states, in fact, it actually states, not basically, it states is not affected by elemental disadvantage. I wanted a neutral unit, a unit that didn't have elemental advantage or disadvantage, so that way we could test perfectly. We don't have any of those other things in the way. Trozette, great. Unfortunately, I forgot that I had immunity set on him as well, so we had to bring Angelica to strip that off. Because we wanted to test in a vacuum where Rimuru only has one buff. We didn't want any deviation from that. So Rimuru is going to only have one buff. We're going to slap this Angelica. Now, coming through here, one other thing to note. The Proof of Valor obviously mitigated some of the damage because the amount of damage that Trozette takes is a lot higher than, not a lot higher, but it is higher than the A Ravi. So we're going to S3 here. We only have one buff. The nice thing with using one person and the same setups every single time is that you don't deviate. You don't have different stats. So we're going to see 10,951 onto this Trozette with one buff. Now, this is similar damage to the A Ravi. However, my Trozette has about 1,000 more defense, so that would mean that the initial hit was much more mitigated than the A Ravi would have been. However, A Ravi had Proof of Valor, so there was 30% mitigation there. Now, whether that was mitigating the initial hit or the true damage, it's very unlikely it was the true damage. It was probably the initial hit, which makes up for that extra defense right there. Okay, so this is with C Armin. Pretty sure you guys know where this is going, on how much this is going to mitigate the damage, but we'll show it anyways, just because I want to make sure that we covered all of our bases. All right, so here comes the Rimuru S3 into the Trozette with C Armin on the field. All right, so it does mitigate the first initial hit, and then mitigates, it comes down to less because of the initial 15% mitigation on the first hit. You still have the overall damage from the true damage not being mitigated. So we wanted to make sure we came in, we wanted to test all of our bases, right? We bring in the Aras. Now, I did see some people indicate when I asked, they said that Aras does not mitigate any of the Rimuru X true damage because it's fixed damage. However, as you will see here in a moment, much like everything else, it took really long on this one. So see the S3 come through. Here it comes into the Trozette. So you're going to see the extra damage get Aras away at the very beginning. That's 1,000 damage into another 1,000 damage. So as you can see, the Aras mitigates a lot of the Rimuru damage. So if you're not bringing an Aras to try to mitigate some of that Rimuru damage, then I don't know what you're doing. Obviously, yes, we're going into tanks. I wanted to make sure that people lived in order to have that proc. Now here, here is the Ross footage. Now, initially we used Ross. I was like, you know what? Hey, let's use Ross. We use a Ravi test, and then we're going to use Ross. And the Ross data was so weird that we had to use somebody else. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. We literally had to use somebody else. This is such a weird bug. Now, one thing too, like I mentioned before, right? When I was talking about the A-Ravi, you noticed that the A-Ravi damage, the extra damage, was great. So far, all the damage that went into Trozette was crit into crit, which was really weird. I don't know if this, I haven't tested this on other units, but all of the tanks that we use this on, it was crit into crit. So it's almost like an extra attack. But just watch this real quick. This is crazy. Here's the S3 damage. It's going to come in right on Ross. Now, before you even comment down below, but Ross is a fire unit. Rimuru's S3 ignores elemental disadvantage. All right, 7,893 damage. This is less damage than Trozette took with an Arias on the field. How? We racked our brains on this, and we still, to this moment, cannot figure out how this works. Now, here's another weird one. We were like, hey, I wonder if C. Armin works with this. Now, in theory, C. Armin's passive should mitigate the initial hit from Rimuru, right? That's what you would expect, because it has in every other situation. However, Rimuru S3 into the Aras, 3958, 7893. That's right. C. Armin passive didn't even mitigate the first hit. Ross does not care about your mitigation. This right here is kind of silly. It's weird. It's crazy. Not only that, but we also come through and we were like, you know what? I wonder how he works with the splash damage. Now here comes the Charlotte S3. Remember at the beginning, Crow took a little bit over 9,000 damage when it came to the splash damage soak. $89.57. Now, it's not a lot less, but it's definitely less than it was for Crow. This is weird. There's no way. Yeah, this is kind of crazy, honestly. A little weird, but the biggest crux of the problem here, and this comes with Sage Vivian and C. Armin. One of the big selling points of Sage Vivian is the 70% damage reduction. However, we can already tell, based on Crimson Armin, who reduces damage, that this is not going to be indicative of reducing damage from Uberius Tooth, from Rimuru S3, from Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, from literally any extra damage source, which is really a lot of big concern, because S1 Hua Young into the Uberius Tooth, depending on how tanky your Sage Vivian is going to be, is likely to, it won't proc the S2 passive that Sage Vivian has. Not only that, but again, a lot of players, when I asked them, they were under the assumption, because of the way that this reads, decreased damage received by allies by 10%. So if this is working as expected, then Smilegate needs to clarify that that's just from an attack. However, if this is how the game is supposed to be, then there's going to be a lot of big changes that are going to happen because extra damage is going to have to be impacted. Everything, artifacts, all of that stuff is going to need to be affected. Now, I understand that in the way the order of operation is, it's attack, it's extra attacks, it's extra damage, and then artifacts. All of like those things happen after mitigation. The extra damage and then artifacts happen after the mitigation step, but they shouldn't. If this is how this is supposed to read, this is how it should be in the order of operations. But that's it for me. I did a lot of testing on this and it was real crazy. I'm super glad that I found this. I don't know how long this has been in the game this way. I would imagine forever, right? And if that's the case, then I'm really surprised that nobody has figured this out until now. But as always, let me know what you guys think in the comment section. What other things would you like me to try to dig into? Because I actually really like doing this. So let me know in the comment section. And as always, like, fave, subscribe, share this out so that more people know and win arguments with it. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take it easy, homies. Peace.